All right, and thanks for tuning in to our MOPS Confessions. And today on the hot seat, we have Chris Rodriguez, head of MOPS at Intellimise, and good friend and longtime startup hero, I'll say. I'm really excited to have Chris on the show today. He's someone that I respect a ton on the MOPS side, and I will admit that I have been pinging him on different Slack channels when I have Marketo questions or like SDR management questions, like someone with a lot of knowledge and a pretty wide breadth of understanding of what MOPS is and can be in different organizations based on how much you're willing to give them. So really, really excited to have Chris on the show today. Chris, thanks a ton for joining us and sharing a little bit of wisdom with the crew here.
Yeah, for sure. Really happy to be on this on the podcast. Like that's I've been really following, like really catching up on a lot of podcasts, and I've been of Mops Confessions, and really value all the stuff that you guys have been doing. It's been really awesome, especially hearing other viewpoints, because I feel like in Mops you usually you're like the one man band in an organization, so you don't really get a lot of feedback from other MOPS professionals. And this has like been an amazing resource. So thank you for that. And also, I'm no longer at Intellimise. I'm consulting, and I'm working with previous coworkers, and other leaders that I've worked for in the past.
Awesome. That's super exciting. And I think that'll be a good opportunity to talk about kind of that paradigm shift of going from like in-house to actual to consulting and how that potentially changes a lot of things. But yeah, so I think today, one of the topics that I was really interested in talking about is there's something that you've witnessed along your career, which is like you call it paradigm shifts. And it's really this idea that the MOPS landscape is constantly changing. The constraints on the MOPS world are constantly changing, and I think you've been fortunate enough to work at a set of companies that had very different go to markets, very different approaches to their motions, and I think that has given you like a pretty wide understanding of what's possible. And so what I was hoping to do today is like go through a few of these experiences that you've had and talk a little bit about what were some of the changes that you lived through and what was kind of some of the learnings that you had and things that could be helpful for other MOPS professionals that are listening to us today. And
Yeah.
so if we kick things off, so when we met, actually, you were head of MOPS at a company called Mattermark. And one of the big changes that happened there was during your tenure at Mattermark, there was a shift in go-to-market of going from selling to an audience of VCs where Mattermark provided enrichment in terms of like what has been the growth trajectory of the company from a size perspective, like a predicted ARR perspective, and serving that to VCs to help analysts figure out which were the hot deals to go after. And then there was a bit of a shift to try and figure out how could we sell this to sales professionals and potentially like MOPS professionals like yourself, almost as a competitor to Clearbit. So that was probably like a massive change within the organization to go from selling to one category of users all the way to a completely different category. And I believe at the time you were also in charge of the team actually doing that sell, that transactional sell, right? The SDR team that was like trying to book meetings and get these transactions done. So can you tell us a little bit about what that change implied from a MOPS perspective, from go-to-market perspective, and how you were able to push the team through that?
Yeah, for sure. So two major changes happened, right? So the one that you just described, which was a change in market, or at least an expansion of market. And really, the idea behind that was, this was, we had clear product market fit when it came to VCs. VCs really wanted to see high growth companies that were doing really well, and we had a few data points and additional metrics that were generated and consolidated by like an amazing data science team And they provided really the level of insight that VCs wanted. And we were starting to see that sales and marketing professionals were also very interested in this as well. So we opened up the doors to include the sales and marketing teams. With that came a change in how we did like how our revenue model really changed. Initially, it was, hey, sign up, and when you sign up, you have to fill in your credit card information. Probably not a huge change for or huge hurdle for a VC. However, when someone is, let's say, mid funnel in a marketing team, but they want to have access to company data, or a sales team, then having to go through the procurement process is probably that much more difficult. So we removed the pricing, and then that opened up the door for more sales development activity. And we hired a bunch of SDRs, a bunch of AEs, in response to that. So that means that once somebody was in the platform during the trial period, that's when the timer started. And the SDR team and the AE team were busy trying to book meetings and close those deals. And it was a fairly transactional, platform. And by way of, like, if you're looking at other SaaS platforms which would have costed, let's say upwards of 70 to 80K, we were closer to, I believe, anywhere between 5 to 25 at the time. I can't remember off the top of my head. It was a few years ago, but it was an easier sell. And like the sales cycle wasn't that long. So yeah, that was like a huge shift. When it came to the MOPS perspective, I would say that really architecting the handoff and understanding how someone inside of a product was experiencing the value of the product, along with the interactions with the SDR, were a pretty big deal. And that came along with a chatbot implementation, right? So we had to find a way to track activities and also support new users, because it was a little less geared towards the sales and marketing world. So there needed to be a little bit more hand holding when it came to understanding like what the different data points were, or how to like query the platform in order to produce the right level of detail and segmentation. And on top of that, there was a demand gen challenge, right? So since we weren't capturing credit card information right up front, that means that the sale was that much harder, which mean that volume had to be that much greater. And I was working alongside of social media and demand gen, and we were trying everything under the sun. And we had this huge goal this one quarter. And after iterating on a bunch of different types of demand gen strategies, we found out that people really liked to be served up segmentation, and we called it listicles, which is essentially we did the queries for them. We were like, all right, if I were this type of company in this region, I would probably want to look at this set of criteria, and then we would post them on LinkedIn, and then we would get a huge influx of people that were downloading, let's say, a gated Google Drive spreadsheet. And from that point on, they were met with some marketing design, and were introduced into the trial of being able to create their own queries. And we also gave them like kind of a script of like, hey, this is how you want to go about it. And we were off to the races. And I think we were like at, we found this growth hack like mid quarter, and we weren't going to hit it at all. We were like, let's say at 20% of the quarterly goal. By the end of the quarter, we were like 99%, to the point where the CEO was also promoting certain listicles at the very last day, the very last hour. And I think we were off by like two or three leads at the time. And we just continued to work on that and continue to iterate on that, and kept the pipeline as full as possible.
Yeah, I think it's a it's a really interesting story because it combines. There's a lot of companies out there that are trying to figure out, they sell SaaS, so they have a product and they're trying to figure out, how can I use the product as a lead magnet, and how can I open up access to the product? And oftentimes it's hard to realize how much it takes to do that successfully. And I think one part that was really interesting about Mattermark is that it wasn't just a product initiative. So I think like having you like on the MOP side understand, okay, like how are the SDRs, like what are the objections they're running into? What are we seeing customers struggle with, which is like initial, like how them getting first value, right? And like creating those listicles to help them get to that first value. It's almost like go to market prototyping what is going to be the feature that we want to push into product to help customers get value. And I think like that's something that a lot of companies should be thinking about when they're trying to do any kind of like to start a PLG initiative, of really understanding it is, the idea of having the product as a support for a go-to-market function, not the go-to-market function trying to be a support for the product. So I think that is something that a lot of companies struggle with. And from a tech stack perspective, one of the big changes, of course, is going from a more like pre-product sales, which can live in, and I believe it was HubSpot at the time that you folks were using. So in HubSpot, where you track all the inbound activity, to now having, to use product data to figure out who's using the product, who's getting value. How did you instrument that? Like what tool were you using, and how did you find a way to potentially like surface people to to reps? I mean, you mentioned like the chat, like was that a way to essentially like give them access to some extent to product data? Like what were some of the iterations that happened there?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So and two things happened, one after the other, and I feel like I can't remember whether or not we ended up going the route of this other product, but I remember like a lot of talks about it because of the feedback that you're referring to, which is the SDR team engaging with the product and then giving that feedback to the product team. So we used Intercom at the time, right? So Drift and Intercom were both kind of like just starting. This is pre-conversational marketing, right? Or before the category was coined. And whatchamacallit, we by way of Intercom, we were able to ingest product level data, all the instrumentation that was done on the product. So then from there, we were able to look at our set of users and figure out which ones were more active, and then prioritize at that point. And then I found a way to feed in Salesforce data into Intercom, and it wasn't like there was no integration at the time. Yeah. So I use Zapier in order to like feed data through. Basically, I'm just circumventing IT in a sense, or DevOps. So I'm like using Zapier to feed data through from Salesforce into Intercom and vice versa, in order to provide firmographic and demographic information that we didn't have on the onset of a trial starting. So from there, the SDR team was able to then engage and, let's say, use the battle decks and the product marketing information that they had in order to, facilitate a meeting that was generated, so they can, so the organization can purchase, a year long, or I think it was MRR. So it was, basically just, have full access to the platform and create as many, lists as they needed at the time. So that's like how it all started. It was just like, let's get all this stuff and mush it together one place so it can, and then find a way to then serve that to the SDR team, which forced the SDR team to become product experts. And that was an interesting dynamic where the SDR team and the demand gen team, along with myself, worked hand in hand all together. And at the time, because of the way that things are architected, I ended up managing the demand gen team and the SDR team, sales ops, and I literally had 3 different monitors up that I was constantly refreshing to make sure that I was seeing the flow of traffic that went all the way down to meetings booked, so then I can, circle back and tell the AE team like, hey, make sure to not, mark this off so then my SDRs can get their quota. So, which is really weird for marketing ops, right? So I mean, but ultimately that's kind of like where it led down to, which is essentially I was wielding product marketing, the product marketing, messaging platform in order to support the SDR team, and the demand gen team was supporting the SDR team by funneling these leads in. And I was also then also generating the campaigns in order to make sure that this stuff worked all well together.
That makes sense. And I think there are 2 parts here that are really interesting about this. One of them that you mentioned is product marketing, right? I assume one of the big challenges when you're going from selling to an audience to selling to a new audience, and even a different way of buying, is that your previous product marketing is probably as close to irrelevant as it can be. And now you need to arm the SDRs with like new product marketing and arm them with the right kind of messaging to book the meetings, make the product seem appealing to the users. And I think you like being at the center of this is really what facilitated that. And I'm really curious if this is something where, kind of looking forward, you would almost like always recommend that like there is a very tight relationship, almost like managerial relationship between SDRs and MOPs or RevOps, because you need to be able to then go ping on the product marketing side and say, hey, we need sales enablement for these folks, or we need more demand, or we need these kind of like features to be more readily available for the SDRs to be able to generate interesting conversations.
Yeah, for sure. I would say like first day through the door at a new organization, the first thing you should ask is, like, where's product marketing? Because what you're going to end up needing to do is, especially nowadays, and this is like, I would say, the days of just inbound and just outbound are over, right? So your SDR team is on the inbound side in one way or the other, because they're trying to push more folks onto your website. And let's say you have semi-warm leads that are inbound that you're going to want your SDR team to engage with, right? So all that, everything that's centered around that is your messaging platform. So you're going to really need to support both how things are distributed on your digital platforms, along with how you do sales enablement with your SDR team. And once again, product marketing is at the center of all that. So I would say, if you're not super tight with your product marketing team and your SDR team, then you might be a little bit like in a silo, and more reactive to what's happening, as opposed to being able to like predict and make support like active campaigns or active motions for those teams.
Right. How much time would you say a MOPS manager should be spending either interacting with the SDRs or going through kind of the day in the life of an SDR every week?
That's a good question. I would say that my response is going to be projection,
Mhm.
right? Something like I'll tell you what I end up doing. Um, I don't feel right unless I'm really close to my sales team, and that's not only the SDR team but also the AE team. Um, I'm I'm hyper aware and uh, like very reactive to feedback, and especially in a fast-paced growth environment, you need as much feedback as possible um, in order to um, in order to support things that are down funnel and support campaigns that are working really really well, right? So you sit in the marketing team, but you definitely toe step, and you're you're part of the SD, of the sales team in one way or the other. Um, I've been fortunate enough to work alongside some sales ops folks, and I find that sales ops usually lives on the AE side of the world when it comes to how they're dealing with CPQ, predictability, and the opportunity pipeline, supporting, let's say, onboarding and enablement, and then you have uh, this no man land of SDR sometimes. But then again, like I've worked in smaller teams, so like maybe that's just my experience. Um, and I find myself like, you know, adopting the SDR team when it comes to ops and saying like, let me make sure that whatever we're delivering through by way of demand gen is something that you can actually see and work on. So I would say that obviously like no more than 50% of your time, but a good chunk of your time is definitely in supporting that team, because ultimately you're supporting demand gen at that point.
Right. Yeah, so no more than 50, but probably no less than 20% or
Yeah.
something like that, right? So there has to be time spent with the SDR teams, and I feel like that is something that larger. I see a lot of MOPS professionals struggle with that or not realize that it's actually like a really big core part of their job to fully understand how their kind of customer, their internal customer, is using whatever they're doing. I mean, of course, there's demand gen that's also a customer, but one of the ways I usually talk about this is thinking that MOPS to me is very similar to product management. There's like some elements of like understanding the technicality of things, but you don't need to implement everything, but really understanding who the customers are and what their needs are to ship the right kind of product is really really critical. And I know that you think about it kind of the same way of saying, hey, like you think about the um, kind of martech and sales tech infrastructure almost as your product, and it's like a question of like, how do I make this product as good as possible to serve the customers internally first in order to better serve the external customers, who are the paying customers of the product ultimately.
Yeah. I would say that this actually is one of my like first principles, which in my view, and this is something that I just strongly believe in. I try to treat people as an end in themselves, and I feel like revenue is an artifact of good rapport and good engagement. So part of their, in the MOPS world, you have two types of customers or prospects, I guess you could say. You have the prospect that you're engaging with, the market itself, and creating an experience for them, depending on your, like, let's say, um, how how much your MOPS team is engaged with digital, and also with demand gen, right? So you have to care about the experience all the way through the pipeline, and what that experience should look like in order for a successful sell. And secondly, it's the technology in itself, the internal stakeholders. They're also your customer, um, because ultimately people want to be able to make use of the technology and have it easy to use for them, digestible, and they want to be able to make quick decisions. ultimately, like especially in the B2B world, um, regardless of who you're serving, either external customers or prospects, or and I'm saying this as a MOPS person, or internal stakeholders who are also customers. Everybody wants to be successful at their job, and like that's why they're doing it. The majority of the time, they want to make sure that whatever they're doing, that they get value validation out of what they're doing. So ultimately, it's my responsibility to ensure that they get a visceral response from whatever it is that they build, and they get that uh, get exactly what they were looking for in a system without it being too much of an administrative hurdle.
Right. Makes sense. And so switching gears a little bit. So then if we move on past the Mattermark days into the next big experience, which was Glyphy, to me, that was probably like another kind of huge shift in like the go-to-market motions that you were confronted with, because Glyphy was almost kind of the opposite of Mattermark to some extent, where it was more like product-led acquisition, huge success, thousands upon thousands of users, of signups, actually like close to millions of users, but a much harder time at figuring out how do we monetize, right? So now it's almost like a very different change of like, we have few users that we monetize really well. How do we grow more users at Mattermark to massive pile of users, like a viral product? So for those who don't know, Glyphy, really kind of a collaborative design tool. And so, yeah, millions of users, and having to figure out how do we monetize those, and how do we actually build an efficient sales team or sales assisted motion on top of that. So maybe if you want to walk us through a little bit, what like were some of the big changes that this led to for you in terms of like exposure to tech stack, the processes internally, and things like that.
Yeah. So this the biggest difference here is we went from the traditional demand gen trial run SDR to AE model to all self-driven, and it's either someone decided to purchase Glyphy at like I think it was like $4.99 for a month, and we had a lot of trial users, and essentially you can create like 2 or 3 different design diagrams and not incur any charges whatsoever. So we had like I think it was over 4.5 million users at one time, and we were generating over 5,000 users on a monthly basis. Like it was ridiculous, right? But we had very little data over those users. The reason behind it is that all of the trials started through Atlassian, and Atlassian was really not keen on giving us a lot of information. We would get a JSON dump of like their email address and a few details about the organization. And there wasn't that much by way of product instrumentation, but that was basically it. So our systems were kind of lean when it came to the depth of data that was associated to a record. And if we ever wanted to look into that even further, we would have to jump into a product database in order to generate new details.
So this is almost one of those where if we think of almost like, from a PLG perspective, at least, like graduating from Mattermark, where you could push everything into Intercom. It's like small enough volumes where everything is manageable in Intercom. You can build a couple rules, to now, as a MOPS person, having to dig into a back-end product database, like a data warehouse somewhere that's owned by product and engineering that contains all the product activity, and having to figure out how to extract insights, but then also extract actionable information to then pass on to the sales team. So like curious, like, did you have an analytics team? Did you have to learn to code, like to figure out like ETL kind of stuff? And how did you go about doing a lot of that?
Yeah, for sure. Did not have an analytics team. Um, I I basically asked for access to Metabase, which was the free BI tool that we were using, and I learned SQL like on the spot because I was like, okay, how are some like there were some let's say there were some visualizations that were like that the engineering team had built out, and I wanted to get more detail out of that. I wanted to create my own kind of like let's say enterprise cell level data uh, from from Metabase. So I had to learn how to kind of like really do like SQL, mainly around joins and understanding how to like consolidate different tables in the database, how to create temporary tables in order to do ETL, and all of that then allowed me to create like a static, well, not a static, but like basically queries that lived that I was able to get some support from the engineering team to create a cron job that pushed over to HubSpot at the time. So we also moved from Marketo to HubSpot to wield like, which was in like, let's say HubSpot is better when it comes to a more creative type of marketing team as opposed to more architected version type of marketing team. So I was pushing data in through there, and then we were able to feed that over to Salesforce, and then our sales team was able to work with that and engage with organizations.
I'm really curious, and this is maybe like just a quick detour that we're going to take here. Would you mind elaborating a tiny bit? I think it's a really interesting point you're making about like HubSpot versus Marketo. What do you mean by that? Of like HubSpot being maybe like more adequate for like maybe creative teams that are less into like architecture and potentially like want to have a MOPs team that's less into like creating more complex workflows. Yeah, I'm just curious to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, something that would take me, let's say, 2 weeks to build out in Marketo, um, by way of landing page, campaign, emails, the email drip, how it integrates with Salesforce. It would take me a day or two with HubSpot. And that's mainly because the my team understood the UI and were like they were very. It was easier for them to wield. They were a much more creative team, not so much on the technical side. So there was much less, let's say, tribal knowledge and product knowledge that was needed. It was more intuitive. So I do really appreciate both ends of the spectrum, along with Pardots. I've worked with all three. Um, However, let's say if you want to have a lean, creative marketing team that is more, say, customer facing and has less bandwidth when it comes to the MOPS and architecture side of this whole thing, then HubSpot's the way to go. Otherwise, if you're, let's say, a much more hierarchical team that that needs a little bit more segmentation, a little bit more engineering integration, better for, like, let's say, the DevOps side of the world, and for larger marketing teams, then Marketo's the way to go.
Is that like almost like a complexity also of like the number of workflows and campaigns where it's like it's easier to support like much more complex workflows or like go to market motions? Like if you have like 3 different business units, is it easier in Marketo than in HubSpot? But if you have like one kind of like core business unit, core go to market motion, and like velocity is of the essence, then HubSpot is a better fit.
Yeah, I believe so. Team size is definitely part of that as well. And not to leave Pardot out of the mix here, but I would say Pardot is great if you have a team that lives, breathes, and eats Salesforce, and is planning on making use of Einstein or their DLP. Just live in Pardot, just move away from the other products, because you're making a bet on their ability to kind of like make it easier for teams to work and get more detail out of the marketing campaign. So, but yes, to what you said earlier about Marketo, for sure.
Makes sense. And I know someone made this comment once, and it kind of stayed with me for a long time. It was almost like Pardot and Marketo are very similar, but it's almost depending on where geographically your team is going to be located, where apparently the person was saying like the Marketo kind of user base is much more skewed to West Coast, and Pardot is much more skewed to East Coast. So it's almost like if you want a team on site at your company, like almost pick which tool based on where you're more likely to have a larger user group. But anyway, that was like it was a comment a couple of years ago that I thought was pretty interesting, that they're not that different in essence necessarily, but it's almost like as a MOPS manager, also like making sure that you're picking the tool that's going to have, like the widest group of potential hirees you can have for to support the tool.
Yeah, for sure. Coke, Pepsi, RC Cola.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good analogy. And then we'll close kind of that tangent, but I'm curious on your side, have you seen like any tools that people should be aware of that are in that kind of vein of the marketing automation platform? Like I know Braze seems to be like getting a lot of traction. I started hearing about like Courier more on the PLG side. And like, are there any tools that you're seeing kind of like pick up some steam that like, MOPS folks should be keeping an eye on, not necessarily buying today, but at least like staying in tune with what's going on the market?
Yeah. So I would say that MOPS is getting harder and harder.
Mm-hmm.
There's more to learn for each tool. There's more tools that are in the mix, and you have to be, an expert practitioner along with being, strategically savvy. And I don't know if there's any other role outside of like the engineering world where that's the same. I would say that what I've seen is consolidative platforms is where I'm seeing a lot of activity, like Plana. I'm actually like really impressed with a lot of the content that they're producing. I haven't actually played with it yet, but I'd be interested in taking a look at how they consolidate things, because if it involves not only consolidating the data that's being available that's available in a particular tech stack, attribution level data, your contract, and and budgeting. I feel like that's all the stuff that marketing ops needs to be on top of. And if there's one place to review that while making good decisions for the future, I feel like that's where this is going. It's a way to consolidate and be at a higher level.
Mm-hmm. Makes a ton of sense. So kind of closing that quick detour that we took. So if we go back to Glyphy, I think the interesting part was like, okay, you have to dig into the product data, learn, figure out how to run a little bit of SQL there. And I mean, this to me seems like, this is one of the things that we strongly believe in at Matt Kudu, that the one of the big challenges go-to-market or RevOps teams are running into is that the source of truth for customer data has completely moved outside of Salesforce, like an MAP or any of those, and now really lives in Snowflake data warehouse or Redshift or whatever database in the background. But that it really means that the backbone of data has shifted away from a tool that the RevOps team could manage into something that is owned by engineering. And I'm curious, like, is this something that you're also seeing, and how are you, adapting to that change? Like, what are things that you're looking more into, either as like skills to learn, like platforms to, to use more to, be able to, live through that change?
Yeah, I think the next shift is really moving away from, let's say, using some sort of UX UI, um, like a Marketo or like HubSpot or Salesforce, in order to get closer to the product database, right? Where stuff is actually happening, and that was my biggest challenge in Gliffy, which was, I have all this stuff happening over here, and I want to do something with it. So I have to move the stuff over here back to my systems in order to do something with it. And a company that's like, I think that's revolutionizing this right now is Retool, which is like, you build the BI, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you can do something with it right then and there. So you can build, internal products for your team, so then they can do something with that product level data, and make changes, and engage in whatever it is that you want to do. To be honest, and I have some former colleagues of mine that, or a former colleague of mine that works there, and is like eating his own dog food, and builds internal tools using Retool for his sales team, that involve product level data. And I feel like, and this, he learned SQL, JavaScript, JSON, maybe some Python, in order to be able to make use of something like Retool. But this guy started off in sales ops, so I mean, like, I feel like that's the next step. You either go down the route of being more of an engineer that serves the marketing team. And I know that there's roles out there for marketing engineer and whatnot, but I feel like that's, like, there is a path from ops to engineering, in a sense, where you start to encroach on product level data, for sure.
Makes sense. Yeah, and interesting. We had Jacob, who's from the MOPs, the RevOps team, actually at Retool, on the show a few months ago. But yeah, I think there's definitely an interesting kind of bifurcation where, to me, it's almost like moving into like a more biz ops organization, where it's like a lot more engineering, almost like data ops kind of thing. We also had someone on the show who went from ops into data ops on the data science side to actually support the ops team. I think the part that to me is tricky about this is, or where I wish there was more, is also like the track towards more of the strategic, like less into the details. Like, it's almost like, in terms of levels of abstraction, I think MOPS today is pretty much at the center, like very similar to a product management role, right? Where you have to understand the technicality, but you're not like a full-on engineer. And you have to understand the strategy, but you're not necessarily yet like a CEO or something like that. But then there's almost a decision of like, do you want to become product owner, like kind of like tech lead, so going down into more of the lower level of abstraction, or going higher? And it feels like there's a lot of tools that are coming out that are built for engineers that MOPS is starting to use, because it unlocks a lot of possibilities, which it almost like creates a pull towards this more kind of, like biz ops style role. But it feels like Retool, I think, can help with this, but like there are fewer tools that are helping, MOPS become more strategic and like really have a seat at the table with the VP marketing, the VP sales to be able to talk about like what's happening. And it feels like they are the best people to actually like bring into that conversation. I think that's why the VP, like why the RevOps and the CRO and these roles that are in between sales and marketing are starting to get a lot of traction, because we need someone to help on the alignment between these two teams. And I feel like MOPS is uniquely positioned to be that, but there's very few tools that are kind of creating that incentive to level up the level of abstraction.
I guess in my mind, I think is that a tool solution, or is that kind of like a process solution? And like that's the reason, like that's one of the reasons where I really like what I'm doing right now. Working with early stage startups, because one of my biggest things is slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And that's something that I brought in from being in the military, working on F-16s back in the day. That was something our commander used to say to us, like, hey, just do it right the first time, and then we won't have to revisit this. I feel like MOPS comes in to an organization once things are kind of set, or once there is a huge need for it. So it's not necessarily a strategic hire. It's more like we need to make sure that the systems don't crash and burn. We need an expert to come in, and that person goes in, and the first 3 to 6 months is usually cleanup and audit and implementation of proper processes and whatnot. It doesn't get until like you're in the year mark that you end up starting to be able to reflect and take a look at what has been built, and then do your statistical analysis rundown to figure out what's possible and what's predictable. So I like the idea of starting off before there's like a lot of stuff built in, and being like, let's think about how this will look like down funnel. Let's think about how the shelf life of this implementation might be, over the span of a year or two, and will it meet the requirements of your go-to-market? And I feel like with that onset, I can let go. And when a MOPS person comes in, they're not coming into an environment that requires them to be in the weeds totally. They can review and then use that strategic skill set that you're referring to actually be supportive at the executive level.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like I wish we saw more like more MOPs transitioning into like a head of marketing role at a startup, right? So I think there's a lot of value in having someone who's been like close to the details at maybe like a slightly larger company and coming in as a leader in a smaller company, right? Because sometimes it's similar to the VP sales kind of thing. I think it's interesting that there's a very clear path of saying, you take AEs that have crushed their quota, that were kind of like team leads potentially, and bringing them on as an early head of sales or VP sales at a younger startup. But we kind of lack a lot of, we lack role models, I think, on the MOP side, of people who've gone down that path of saying, well, I actually was like close to demand gen, close to SDRs, close to the fundamentals of how the marketing engine works. And now I'm actually going to start, I'm going to be like leading the organization and bringing in people that are actually going to do these things that I used to see from a different perspective. And it's something that I feel like there's quite a few people out there that unfortunately suffer from the imposter syndrome, where you're like, oh, but like, I can't do this, like way above my pay grade. But the truth is, like, a lot of MOPS people have their ear on the ground, and they have a much better understanding as to like what works, what should be done at organizations, than some executives that, come in and kind of like ask high level questions, and, 12 months after having implemented their playbook, move on to the next organization.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. That's on multiple fronts. Like, I feel like my experience gives me some, let's say, informed anecdotal feedback. And also, I do have heavy imposter syndrome because, not everything I've done has been successful. And, you know, every single organization has had a different way of going about doing business. I mean, you've talked about two of them just recently. Um, and I've been in a lot of different startups, some enterprises, and every step of the way, it's like, I know the fundamentals about a particular system, but how this all works together, it's just like, it's scary. It can be scary. Um, However, like, once again, like, early stage startups that have a particular model, there is a predictable path that would make it so ops isn't like so heavy. And like, this is kind of like my own feedback on MOPs in general, or just, business operations in general. Like, um, the goal is to make it so that's like, it's a it's not something that's focused on. Um, the goal in my view is, you want your marketing and sales team to be as, contemplative and creative as possible, to create the best possible engagements. How do you do that? Are they being bogged down by the administrative tasks? Are they getting the feedback that they need from the systems that they wield? Um, and is it intuitive enough to make it so they can just have natural interactions? Because ultimately, back to what I was saying earlier, we're all trying to be successful here, either making purchases of software, or helping folks purchase that software. We're all trying to like lift each other up in one way or the other, if not directly, by way of like how we're trying to generate revenue, which is why I say, revenue should be an artifact of treating a person as an end in themselves.
Yeah. I know we're pretty much at time, but wanted to ask one last question. It's very open ended. It's kind of, we talked about a couple changes that you lived through. What do you think is the next big change that is going to happen in the MOPS world, and that folks should be aware of and on the lookout for?
Yeah, so I think that Mad Kudu was at the beginning of this change, right? So I mean, like, when you and Sam first sold to Mattermark, and you gave us the presentation deck back in the day, like, I was just like, I was shocked and just amazed by what was capable of the feedback loop um, that MedKudu would provide, by just ingesting data and then being able to say, like, here's what quality looks like on a surface level. And we were able to do all kinds of crazy stuff at the beginning of that, which meant, better segmentation for demand gen based off of what we were doing. What we were seeing through MyKudu from close won deals and retention, which was phenomenal. And the idea here is how marketing ops is going to wield ML and personalization, which is why I say, like, there needs to be like a level up in how we oversee these different things. Because with ML, the the art of, or at least the work of architecting and getting useful information out of your data systems is becoming less difficult, unless you want to kind of, like, let's say, actively interact with that data system. And on the other side, with personalization, there is personalization ML out there for every step of the funnel now, right? So personalize with ads, personalize with your website, personalize in the funnel. either through rules based or some by some other method. And that level of personalization is also available in the product. So I feel like that's the next step, is like, how does a marketing ops person or a business operations person sit back and be able to architect um, a personalized experience from the inception or from brand engagement on the top all the way through to retention. I think that's the next step, and I feel like there's going to be something that comes that sits on top of everything, or at least a new methodology and way to engage with all of that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I think it's really interesting also to think about it really from I like how you use the word architecture, because I think it's really a big architectural challenge more than anything else, right? The fear I often have with a lot of these kind of nascent tools is that it can seem very growth hacky, and it's like the kind of stuff that can give you like a very quick win. But I like the way you're thinking about it, saying, hey, you have to think about like, how do we orchestrate a relevant journey from start to end, and how do we make sure we have the right capabilities, the right products and people who can manage the products and processes in place to create that journey. I think, yeah, with like some of the new ML stuff, like the GPT-3, like all the text stuff that exists now. I mean, it's just crazy. You can write, there's this like website where you can write a song, and you can ask the algorithm to write it in like a Kanye West style or like country style or whatever, based on the theme. And it's just the generation of text is getting easier and easier, but it's a question of like, how do you make that, how does that fit into the overall architecture? Makes a lot of sense. Thanks a ton for joining us and sharing a lot of your stories, and yeah, just being very open about what you've gone through. I guess, what's the best way for people to reach out to you if they want to be in touch, if they have questions, or if they want to work with you on exciting projects they have?
Yeah, for sure. So you can find me on LinkedIn. Hopefully, there's a lot of Chris Rodriguez's out there. So I think it'll maybe I'll just add a link to when this is posted. But if you want to reach out to me directly, you can go to my website, valeopress.com. And that's where I just have a simple form, and we can start from there.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Well, again, Chris, thanks a ton for joining us. This was an absolute pleasure. And yeah, hopefully for more of these, and I'm excited to see what kind of questions we get and like starting the conversation around all of this. But thanks again a ton for sharing all the insights.
Yeah, yes, sir. Cool beans, man.
All right. Take care. Bye, everyone.
Bye.